to another convening of the Infrastructure and Environment Subcommittee of the African American Task Force, co-chaired by myself and Senator Lockman. But today I am a one-man act as Senator Lockman is out enjoying some time away. So I am excited to speak with everyone this morning. One of the biggest parts of conversation that Senator Lockman and I had as we were trying to kind of regroup after the legislative session ended and kind of figure out where the task force would go and what was kind of next for us in this second half of the year was making sure that we take time to do less talking and more listening. More listening to state organizations and more listening to organizations who are boots on the ground and the advocates who do the work that makes environmental justice throughout our state. So today we are providing another opportunity to do that, where we will hear less from members of the subcommittee and myself as chair, and more from boots on the ground organizations and state agencies. One of the organizations that will be talking with us today does work around, does significant work throughout our state around PFAS within the water throughout our state of Delaware. And then we'll also be hearing from DENRAC and some of the work that they do around emergency notifications. But before we jump there in the agenda, let's start with doing a roll call. Caitlin, if you are able to take that over.
Absolutely. And we will start with you, Madam Chair. Senator Pinckney.
I am present.
Harold Stafford. Willie Scott.
Present.
Dan Young. Dana Cobb.
Present.
Marlena Gibson.
Present.
Marlene Saunders.
Present.
Abby Samuels.
Present.
Simone Philpotts.
I'm here.
Wendy Henry.
Present.
Representative Larry Lambert.
Present.
All right, we do have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and good morning to all of our amazing subcommittee members. The work could not be done without each one of you. And with a quorum being present, we can move right into a acceptance of the minutes from our last meeting, which was on June 3rd, assuming everyone had an opportunity to review those minutes. If anyone has questions or updates from the June 3rd meeting minutes, I would be happy to entertain them. Otherwise, I'm happy to also entertain a motion of acceptance of the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a movement by Dr. Saunders and a second by Mr. Willie Scott. Those meeting minutes from June 3rd have been accepted. And moving right along, we will go ahead and move into our agenda for the day. Just to kind of quickly put out there, between that June 3rd meeting and this morning's meeting, there was a convening of the full body of the African American Task Force, where Senator Lockman and I brought forth the recommendations that the subcommittee put together during our last June 3rd meeting. I'm sure we're all eager to discuss the results of that meeting. However, that is something that we're going to actually put on hold until our September meeting, so that Senator Lockman is here to join us in that conversation. So we will return to that meeting. I don't want anybody to think that we're not going to discuss the results of it, but just wanted to make sure that Senator Lockman and all members of the subcommittee task force are able to be present as we discuss that meeting. So moving right along, I am really honored and excited this morning to introduce Ms. Sita Coleman-Kamala from Pfas Solutions, which is an organization that does a lot of work around testing of PFAS within the waterways. I am not going to try to botch what PFAS stands for, but we know that it is a carcinogenic that is found in water throughout not just Delaware, but throughout the country. And there's a lot of attention around it now. Sita invited me to tour Pfas Solutions, what I believe was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Time just kind of does its own thing, so I can't exactly remember when that was. But they are doing a lot of really amazing work there, and I wanted to give them the opportunity to come and talk to our subcommittee and provide some of the education that they provided to me and to some other members of the legislature. So Sita, I'm happy to turn it over to you and for you to tell us more about the work that you guys are doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator Pinckney. It was just such a joy to host you because I left that meeting feeling very energetic. I said, somebody wants to know what we're doing. So we've been working. And so thank you for coming and thank you for giving us the time to share some of what we've learned. I cannot show my video. It says I can't do it. It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. So I'm
Okay, I just changed that setting. Could you try again?
Okay. It still says cannot. It still says I can't. Let's start your video. Yeah.
ETI, I have the setting set to all panelists. Any advice here?
I don't know.
So Asita is trying to share her PowerPoint. I have the sharing option set to all panelists.
Well, no, it's not so much that I cannot show my face. I can't start my video. I think I can share my presentation. Let me just.
Okay.
I'm wondering if that is a problem that all subcommittee members are having, because I'm noticing we're not seeing any beautiful faces this morning. So
Yes, I don't see anybody else either. I can certainly see. Can you see my presentation now?
yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, it's just that you can't see me, but that's okay. Yeah, it still says you can't see. Shall I just keep talking?
Sure, you can go ahead and keep going, and I'm assuming DTI will be trying to work in the background to see what's going on as far as your video, but we can see the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So we are an organization. We're located in Newcastle, Quigley Boulevard. Most of you know where the post office is, and we are a not-for-profit 501c3. We started right smack or right at the beginning of the COVID-19, March 2020. Quite amazingly, we didn't know, of course, that we would be, running into such huge problems. The first slide shows you some of the board of directors. We have Dr. Charles Reardon from University of Delaware on our board, Jennifer Field, who is a giant in PFAS testing analysis. She's probably tested every firefighting foam formulation. She's on our board. And we have somebody from an environmental engineering company and 3 people who were with us from the beginning: James Dinage, Don Durandetta, and Charles Krukil, lawyers, treasurers, and so on. And our team is a very small team. There's me, and it's really Chuck Powley, who is our chief scientist, who came from former DuPont Central Research and has probably done this for decades, done PFAS analysis, so knows the chemistry, knows the history, knows what they were used for. It's because of him we really hit the road running, and we've been testing water, wastewater, biosolids. And not only that, what I want to share with you today is really much more to do with what other states, well, I'll give you a little bit of introduction to PFAS, just in case you don't know what they are. But much more importantly, what I wanted to share is how other states that we have studied have gone about setting their own regulations. Thanks to DHSS, who gave us a consulting project in 2020 to study PFAS regulations. 13 different states have done in this area. And I want to share with you examples from 2 states, New Hampshire and Michigan. What that the study allowed us to do is to actually interview people at these 2 states at their environmental regulations organizations and their health organizations. And our question really was to go beyond what we could read in online or Google or ton of information on the website. We wanted to talk to those people to say, what is the biggest people and change management that you came across in coming up and setting the regulations? How did you get the buy-in? How are you managing the expenses? So it's really to learn about the change management, which this is an enormous challenge of successful change management and implementation. I can, with a limited time, I just can share with you what I think is some really great work that was done at New Hampshire and Michigan to help to learn from that. And then I want to tell you a bit about our own analysis we've done in our lab of both drinking water and wastewater in Delaware. So through that, I hope to touch on why and where environmental justice intersects this PFAS contamination. So very briefly, can you all see this slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, is it possible that you could go to the slide share mode? I'm sorry, the slideshow mode, so it would enlarge the screen and make it more legible?
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. You still can. Can you see me now?
Yep, we can see you.
All right. I don't know what you can see, but I'm on full screen. I apologize for that. I had it on a smaller screen. So PFAS is a huge story. I mean, you could, if you Google PFAS, which stands for perfluoroalkyl polyfluoroalkyl substances, you will have about 6 or 7 million hits. It is the most, it's come into both the public, social, environmental, literature and media, both academic and non-academic media, very fast. It's amazing how fast this has climbed into the front pages, back pages, everywhere. It's huge. There are purportedly more than 4,000 compounds, but for the sake of today's discussion, really, I want to just explain it in very short. There are different chemicals and with different chain lengths. And so most of the work that's been done today in terms of regulation is for the products that have 8 carbons. They're both carboxylic acid, sulfonic acid. You don't need to really remember those, other than just remember the 2 products that are regulated today are PFOA and PFOS. The EPA has health advisories on 2 of those. The others that are shown here, PFNA, PFHXS, I apologize for the mouthful, and the other PFAS, those are drawing the attention. And also New Jersey and New Hampshire and some of the other states, and you'll see later on, have included those as regulated substances for drinking water. And why isn't this advancing? Oh, sorry, there you go. What are PFAS? So the other thing really I think we want to understand is how are people exposed to this? The primary route, based on the toxicology that I've studied, the main route of exposure is drinking water because we have a lot of it and they are very soluble in water. And some of these PFASs break through the placenta and breast milk to infants, which is what drove Minnesota and New Hampshire to say, that's what we want the rest of the population. It's not just good enough if we have a standard for breastfeeding mothers. if they are the vulnerable population, we need that same standard for everybody. So that's an important conclusion they drew. Inhaling, ingesting may contribute, although right now there are no standards for measuring that. And there is other PFASs that are coming through. In addition to what you can get from outside, what is so concerning for the regulators is it is bioaccumulative. That means it stays in your blood and it builds up. So that's the reason why people want to act on this. Okay. What are some health risks? It's not quite right, Senator Pinckney, to call them that they are carcinogenic. They're hazardous substances, and the health risks associated are varied, and the work continues. Huge amount of work goes on. They're still being studied both in the US and outside, but what people do agree, increased cholesterol level, changes in liver enzymes, small changes in infant birth weight, altered immune system function. I have read toxicologies of these 14 states that have done the work. It's a hugely complex area. I do not want to summarize, I won't even try, but the one thing in my own mind that felt really important is that it affects the immune system of children, infants under the age of 5, because their immune system is developing. And then you have this high blood pressure and thyroid and increased risk of kidney and testicular cancer. If people want to know more, there's a huge amount, but I would suggest you read at the ATSDR website link that I have given at the bottom. So how do they, did I skip something? No, okay. How do they get into the environment? It's varied, because PFASs have been used extensively in so many consumer and industrial products. Both the way they were used, not just, a few companies manufacturing them, but they were used in fabric coating, paper coating, Teflon pots and pans, and many, many. I have a slide that shows where all they've been used. And then, of course, once we make these products, we put them in where? In landfills. And from landfills, they can leach from the landfill products that have been buried in, like carpet coating, textile coating. The other big confirmed source is firefighting foams from military bases, because PFASs were very, very good at putting out fires. So the military endorsed them, DOD endorsed them, they use them to put out fires, they use them to train people to put out fires at airports. They can go from there. And then I've already talked about manufacturing emissions. So this is not just simply 1 or 2 big manufacturers, but lots of mom and pop, So the one in Blades was a company that coated Teflon skillets, cookware. You have thousands of such examples where it was used to manufacture goods. And of course, all of these then release wastewater. It goes into stormwater and goes into wastewater plants. And from there, you can have the solids from the wastewater, which are called biosolids, then get land applied and circulates back in the environment. That's okay. That sounds like it's, many products going out everywhere, but then the question is, where are some real hotspots? The study that was done by the group of scientists at the bottom, very, very strong group of scientists. Christopher Higgins at Colorado School of Mines. This was an EPA-funded study, large study, 36,149 drinking water samples. EPA, UCMR3, that stands for uncontrolled, UCMR3, I know what it stands for. But it is, suffice it to say that it is a very large data set. What they established is the number of industrial sites that manufacture or use these compounds, the number of military fire training areas, and the number of wastewater treatment plants are all significant predictors of PFAS detection frequencies and concentrations in public water supplies. So for me, this is where the intersection on where are these facilities? Who are the people who live close to them? How many of them drink from water that is, own wells that perhaps doesn't get through any kind of treatment? This to me is still one of the most significant publications funded by the EPA that says, hey folks, here's where the hotspots are. If you think you got PFAS in your state, you ought to be testing, both water and wastewater close to where these facilities are. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll find them, but it just is a predictor, right? So PFAS in drinking water, I just want to give you an example of how New Hampshire went about doing their regulatory work. They did statewide sampling of drinking water. The two that I wanted to talk about really is, well, the one they actually highlight, and I think led them to the regulatory action. In 2014, Peace Air National Guard Base, sort of like our Newcastle National Guard Base, they found PFAS. They found PFOS and PFHSX 2014, and then one of the manufacturing facilities that coated fiberglass that is used for industrial products. It was actually a very revealing one because it was actually going out of this stack emission. It went into the air, and these things actually are now drawing attention, air emissions from these, not just water. It goes into rain and then drops down, and they found significant quantities of PFOA in 2016. New Hampshire, the response, you can just quickly go through that. 16 is when they started. They just said, okay, let's go with the EPA. It had a 70 nanograms per liter, which is parts per trillion as emergency groundwater standard. And then through 16, 17, 18, and 2020, they went through and they set what is called as an MCL, which is a maximum contamination load. And they codified 4 PFASs, not just the 2 that the EPA had, 4 PFASs into MCL, into law. That's just the New Hampshire example. And then this table, which is hard to read, but I just wanted to put it out there. Each state, these are the states we studied in that DHSS study. That report is available to the public if they want to read it, because it is DHSS who funded it. You can read, but what you see from here is the US EPA column, which is, I don't know if you can see, has standards only for 2, PFOA and PFOS, whereas New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Minnesota, Michigan, and California have lower levels and for different and more PFASs. So this is an evolving picture. It's changing. What surprised me is the change during 2020 when I thought, people would not be able to do this work. So this work has progressed very fast in the last 4 years through the states. In wastewater, that's the other infrastructure that's now getting attention, Michigan. I apologize again for the complexity of this picture, but I just wanted to show you how do PFASs get into wastewater treatment plants? Well, wastewater treatment plants are, I call them the kidneys of our water systems. They clean the water, except they cannot clean PFASs. They cannot they cannot get rid of them. And you see stuff coming from industry and from landfills, from farmland, all of that, well, actually, no, farmland receives the wastewater from the wastewater treatment plants. And in terms of, I just wanted to say there are two policies. One is called two permits. NPDES is one of the permitting routes. And the EPA just basically said they're going to start putting out a test method for wastewater and biosolids. And they have multiple policy routes, but NPDES and the other one is TRI, Toxic Release Inventory, are the two that they're going to be using to monitor releases into the environment. So how do they leave the wastewater? It's just interesting that they go out once the water after so-called purification leaves, and in the sludge, which is then made into manure called biosolids, which then gets spread and used because it is rich in organic nutrients. However, today it carries PFAS. And some of that biosolid is dried and again used as a fertilizer. And after wastewater is receiving the most attention from regulators and air emission. We had a call with the EPA R&D scientists, and they say, yes, we need a test method to test for air. So those are the three environmental releases for communities that are living around any of these facilities. We ought to be paying attention to what is happening, how do we test for them, can we test for them, and then how do we remove them? Michigan, just wanted to say, Michigan for me, and everybody quotes Michigan, wastewater study, they tested 45 major wastewater treatment plants. We have good connection. In fact, I was going to bring a wastewater treatment webinar from Michigan. We did one from New Hampshire, which is actually on our website. If you want to hear the toxicologist from New Hampshire talk about it, it's on our website. We were going to organize this, it's just that we haven't gotten around to it. So how do you remove them? Well, they basically went through and they said 45 plants, folks. Out of the 45, I think maybe there were 5 in the whole state that had very high levels of PFAS coming out of the wastewater treatment plants. And they said, no, we need to monitor them going in. And then they told them, put carbon filters. PFAS is in Delaware. I don't know how many of you know, but the Air National Guard site around the Newcastle, near the Newcastle airport, that is designated as a PFAS area. You can read about this on the DENREC website. What is noticeable here is, of course, these that are marked, these stars with a red, star. Those are the contaminated wells of Newcastle Municipal Services Commission. We have been testing their well water before and after they treat them. Treat them means filter them through carbon filters. There's a whole story, again, you can read on their website of when they discovered it and how they went about putting in carbon filters. Our lab here with this is really very, very close. It's very convenient for both. Artesian is the other water supplier, Newcastle. Very convenient for them to have a lab close by. Before we started the lab, they were sending samples to Indiana and waiting 3 weeks for the results to come back. In the meantime, not knowing whether their treated water they were supplying was good or not, because they were taking a long time, the private lab. So that's actually the reason also why we were started by the Longwood Foundation, because they realized that there was really a need for a local lab. And so that's how we got started with a very small grant. And we've done a lot of testing, but also if you go on our website, you'll read the research projects we're doing. We got a big grant from the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research to test for PFAS in farms in Pennsylvania. Why in Pennsylvania? Because we have a partner in Pennsylvania. We just recently heard that we are going to be getting a grant from the Department of Defense to develop a PFAS innovation product. This graph is a bit technical, but I wanted to show you This is from a Newcastle, Delaware well, before and after activated carbon. Quickly, first one is one product, the PFOS, and the other one is PFCA. What you see is this blue bar here is before, how high it is 1,000 ppt. And the red line here, 70 parts per trillion, is what the EPA says is okay. But recall, New Jersey would have the line down at 13. But right now, Delaware is following the EPA guideline, which is 70, which means the Newcastle water system is meeting the EPA standard of 70 ppt for the sulfonic acid and 70 ppt for the carboxylic acid. What is interesting is we've started to analyze for the shorter chain PFASs, they're called the shorter chain, because actually the public water systems themselves want to know if these are present in their water, because they expect that the EPA and the world will start moving the requirement to start removing some of these. So we have a research project with Calgon Carbon. If any of you would like to go and visit the pilot plants we have at the Newcastle Municipal Services, which are testing new and better filter products to see if they can remove these shorter chain ones, because they're doing okay with the ones that the EPA now says are bad, but these shorter chain ones will also be, are they expected to be, coming under scrutiny. So this is actually also on the CDC website. The CDC did measure PFAS in the Delaware in residents' blood around the Newcastle airport. And this shows you that the dark blue bar is what they found for Delaware, and the light blue is the national average. And the slides, the numbers at the bottom shows, what products they tested for and how much higher of these products there are in the bloodstreams of the PFAS. The PFAS in the bloodstreams of the people. The last one is I wanted to just show you some work we did analyzing PFAS in biosolids. Remember, biosolids are the solid residues from the wastewater treatment plants. We got samples, they were freely available. We tested them, 2 plants that are very nearby. And we tried to visualize this data by showing what we call spider charts. I don't know if you can see, there is a little spider in the blue and the other spider chart is in the red. They're very close together, and yet they have vastly different PFAS profiles. We don't know why. It raises some really interesting questions. Where could they be coming from? Where's the wastewater coming into these plants? Where is it going? We submitted this particular, using this data, we submitted a proposal to Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, put out some requests for community funding. We submitted a proposal through her to the House appropriation, which is now being supported both by Senator Coons and Senator Carper, funding for studying PFASs in the wastewater infrastructure. We haven't heard. We hope to get the funding, in which case we can come to the bottom of, how are wastewater pipes connected? Where could they be coming from? And what can we do about it? So that's where we are. And I want to just finish with some conclusions, really. My hope and my wish is that when the state starts the work investigating PFAS in Delaware, both in the water and in wastewater and elsewhere, what we've learned from that study we did of the 13 states is that it is very important to be inclusive of all stakeholders. I mean, okay, to the extent it's possible, you really have to include the community engagement from the beginning, because unlike other environmental contaminations, there's just a lot of information, both good and bad out there. There's a lot of panic. Good science needs to prevail. That good science needs to be communicated to people so people understand and they're not fearful. Because if people are fearful, they're not going to allow you to go and test wherever you want to test and establish some science and collect the data. That's what we learned. The states that have gone about getting good data included people from the beginning, collected the data. That's really my main message. And with that, I will just stop talking.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Sifa. It was very, very informative. One of the things that, well, since from the beginning of the kind of this year, the work that the subcommittee has been doing has been primarily focused on the housing and the infrastructure side of things. So as we move from the infrastructure side over to the environmental side, we really wanted to have an understanding of what is going on in Delaware in terms of environmental injustices. Where are the areas that need focus, specifically those that impact Black and Brown communities. And so having you to present this information to us is incredibly helpful. You talked about the contamination in the water, specifically around the Newcastle airport, which is a part of the district that I represent. So those individuals whose blood levels were tested by the CDC are the constituents that I represent. And anytime we have the opportunity to highlight the real lives and the impacted lives of the Delawareans who elected us to office and who we serve, I think is important to do so. Even thinking about the contamination in the water down in the Blades, one of the things that I think was really incredible that you talked about is remembering that this isn't always large, massive companies doing shadowy things in the dark, right? Like sometimes these are smaller companies that work with like these hazardous chemicals. And so highlighting the importance of looking in every crack and every crevice of where the PFAS contamination is coming from is just, I think, incredibly important. So thank you for presenting this information to us. Now that it's interesting, now that we are moving to the environmental side, I saw a lot of our more science-based members furiously taking notes and eyes kind of getting bigger on the screen now that we're kind of in their passion areas. So I'm excited to turn the mic over to subcommittee members who may have questions. And I see Dr. Saunders with her hand up, so I'm happy to turn it over to you, Dr. Saunders.
Well, thank you so much for this incredibly important report, not only for the information that it provides, but it really helps to frame questions that can be the target of research involving researchers and community. I'm so pleased that you emphasize the importance, the necessity, the fundamental aspect of community being involved in research. Willie and I are a part of an important project in Delaware, the Delaware CTR Excel project, which includes 4 partner institutions, one of which is the University of Delaware. And we are about bringing researchers, scientists, and community together to look at toxic pollution, both air and water. And as people know, water pollution is a big, big issue in Delaware and has a special complexion in Sussex County, where a source of the pollution is the chicken industry.
Oh, yes.
So I am very, very much looking forward to sharing this presentation and you and PFS solutions to the project to see how, to see what kind of partnership can be put in place. One of the limitations of this particular project is that the PIs have to represent one of the 5 institutions. But that shouldn't be a limitation. My grandmother said, if there's no way, make a way. And I'm looking forward to talking with Willie about this afterwards, and you, and Penny Dryden, who's a part of an organization about which we are a part. So thank you, and thank you again. I am just so uplifted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is your presentation available? Will it be available to us?
Yeah, I've sent
Okay.
it already. It is available. And also, on our website, we have a lot you can read about that. I just want to say something about PFAS. They don't just present themselves as alone, in water contamination. And this one is focusing on PFAS, but they are mixed with, it's amazing how many other chemicals there are in the water, including pesticides, fertilizers, bactericides, things they put in the chicken feed that come out through the chicken manure and end up. So they all come together. So when we are starting to study how you remove PFAS from water, we also want to study if those are removing these other contaminants. So it's fundamentally, we are working with the University of Delaware, Professor Pei Chu, and we're starting to talk with Dr. Charlie Reardon to say, we need to bring together the other work that's going on in, under EPSCoR and other things in general, PFAS into that, realizing that PFAS is an extremely specialized area.
And if I may, I would recommend getting to Dr. Gregory Hicks. He is the principal investigator for the CTR Excel project.
Okay.
And Willie and I will certainly give this report to Penny Dryden, who is our leader with the Community Air Monitoring Network. Thank you so much again.
Sure.
Excellent, excellent. And Sita, if you would like, you can send the presentation to Caitlin and myself, and we will disperse it out to subcommittee members.
I've already received it.
Perfection.
I sent it this morning.
Perfection. I should have known. Caitlin is literally always on it.
Also, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I just wanted to note that Dan Young has joined us.
Perfect. Welcome, Mr. Young, and happy to turn the mic over to Mr. Scott, who has his hand up.
Great. Thanks for the presentation. And I guess my question is that, while we're doing the research and gathering data and, learning more about PFAS and all of its constituent components, are there things the state should be doing to further mitigate the effects? So we need to get the science squared away. We need to study and we need to do some research. But what should the state be doing in the interim period to ensure we're protecting residents, across the state or in specific parts of the state as best we can until we learn to do something else? So I guess that's my question. What mitigation measures should we be taking that are not being undertaken today?
Well, first of all, I personally would recommend that the state, mitigation is one thing, but the state should start testing drinking water at some of the more vulnerable populations, including, daycare centers and schools that have their own wells. And it's, you can select them. You can select those based on what the EPA has said. If there are schools and daycare centers near any of those hotspots, and it doesn't take a lot to test and put in filters. Most of these are just small population to put under the sink filters, carbon filters, doesn't cost a lot of money. It's these large filters that are for, public water that cost a lot of money. But if you want to put under the sink filters, because, you're mixing milk and juice for children in the morning. And, they're usually there 5 days a week. They're not. So that is something they can do. I would recommend, in fact, in New Hampshire, that's what they found. They found that there was a daycare center on that site where they found air emissions. So do that first. Do the vulnerable population, the children first. In terms of, long-term mitigation, I think some of what Senator Pinckney is doing in terms of the bill for firefighting foams, take them out of commerce. There's already work ongoing in removing the PFAS from, type B, I think they're called Class B firefighting foams that contain PFAS, where there's not necessary, but being used for training, identify and remove them. And I know I was on the call with Senator Pinckney when they were, and Hanston, they were looking at the PFAS and firefighting foams. That's one. So there are, bit by bit, you can go through and do some urgent things.
Mhm.
right? While you're waiting to do the research. And we
Great.
can learn from states. We can learn from other states.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. I love when we don't just ring the alarm, but we also come with our solutions to the problem as well, so we can walk away from this meeting and kind of know where we can start as we continue to build a longer, more sustainable solution. We also have some more urgent things that we can be working on in the interim. So thank you for that, and thanks for that great question, Mr. Scott. Representative Lambert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Coleman Kamula, thank you so much for all of this information. A lot of this information was kind of shocking, seeing how significantly higher we are above the national average. So thanks again for your work. And I look forward to getting to know you better too. In regards to the list of contaminants that you currently test for, are there any other contaminants that you think we should be testing for? And because I know that the PFAS, the list of items is growing. So I wanted to know if there's anything else that we should be keeping an eye out for.
As far as we are concerned, we are really, really specializing and focusing on PFAS. The equipment we got is dedicated more or less for PFAS. Part of the reason is because it is required to find them at parts per trillion level. To do so, we have to keep the lab very clean from other contaminants. Otherwise, we get false positive results and signals get swamped. To the point, it is unbelievable. I walk into the lab and say, what are we chasing through the lab today, guys? We go and test the paints. We take swabs of the paints. We take air samples because there's air hanging over that comes through the nitrogen gas. And we are more or less like a clean, facility, ultra clean facility. We don't test. And that's true with almost all PFAS labs. They're dedicated completely only for PFASs. Your second question of what you should be testing for, well, there is a long list of chemicals, and the EPA has other policies that are, the Clean Water Act and UCMR 3 and UCMR 4, UCMR 5. These are all names they give, and the list is growing. And they have lithium, they have brominated flame retardants. There's a whole lot of stuff that is being required to test. Can they be tested? Yes. Are we doing them? No. But of all of those chemicals that come through water, PFAS probably stand on their own just because they're so soluble, right? They're soluble and they can bind to protein in such low levels. And that's why they're getting a lot of attention now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Saunders.
Yes, I have one question. The project to which I referred, one of the things we're interested in doing is developing a citizen scientists. Who would be trained, for example, to collect samples. The projects that you mentioned, New Hampshire and Michigan, have they written articles that talk about community engagement as it pertains to developing community scientists and what that involves and what that looks like? Or can you point us in a direction of looking at other projects where that was a component?
It's very hard to train people to take samples of PFAS just because even trained sample takers have to do some things, extraordinary things like not eat pizza, 3 days before because pizza trays have PFAS in them, right? Don't use Sharpie pens and Post-it notes and, clothing. And so what we do is and what most states have done is that when we go and get samples or when we give sample bottles to, for example, the Newcastle water operators, there's a sheet that we give instructions on how not to contaminate sample. But in terms of citizen scientists, I would say it's not so much you can't, and I would say that's hard, and I haven't read anything, but certainly I think we are doing a lot of training on wastewater operators. Because unlike public water, wastewater operators, every town has a small wastewater operation plant, and they've been doing this for a long time. And PFAS is coming at them like an Acela train, right? So we have actually gone and done training through the Delaware Rural Water Association. Telling them about what's PFAS, how do I, what do I do if I found it? How do I stop it from coming in? Because, it's sort of like Walmart. When Walmart took a policy about stopping certain products containing phthalates and bisphenol A, it's told its suppliers, you ain't bringing your products into my shop. I won't give you shelf space till you take them out, right? So to some extent, not always, but wastewater treatment plants, they can tell the ones that are bringing in the water into their plants to say, have you tested it for PFAS? So you could call them citizen scientists, but those are just simple folks operating wastewater treatment plants. I don't mean simple and simplistic, but they're not scientists. You could just do certain things to raise awareness without raising fear. Because if you raise fear, it'd be like COVID. I don't want to test it because, if I find it, then I may be asked to shut down, right? And so, in fact, we are going about doing a project in Pennsylvania by telling farmers, give us the samples. We won't tell who you are. And in fact, if you don't want to know the data, because you may have a hard time selling your farm afterwards, because once you know, you can't not know, you don't have to know that we found them, but we want to find them for research. So that's why I keep talking about fear gets in the way of finding out what's happening. And I think giving the training to the wastewater treatment plants gets over the fear to say, test them. Nobody needs to know that it's your water, right? We can number them 1 through 25. Because if you know it's not there, you can sleep better, right? It may not be there. You may not have any issue. Just don't be afraid.
Mr. Scott?
Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow on to that comment. So for our wastewater treatment plants in Delaware, particularly the municipal plants, as you indicated, the sludge that comes from those plants may go to, farm applications. Do we have a way of tracking where we suspect or know that we have high levels of PFAS going through the waste treatment systems where that sludge goes?
No, we don't. We haven't started testing, but that's what we asked the funding for from the, Lisa Blunt Rochester. But now that DENREC has received the settlement money, I sincerely hope that they've started developing plants, right? And we could be part of that. We could be part of that discussion to share what we know and what we understand to be the case.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And thank you so much for all of these wonderful questions and the engagement. The presentation is so exciting. I actually had a question come in on my Twitter account that somebody in the audience wanted to know. Are you able to talk about if there is any availability for blood level testing for people who might live in contaminated areas? I know that when we talked about the community near the airport, that was something that was done by the CDC. They actually came to do the testing because we knew that the contamination was so bad in that area. But for people who believe that their water might come from water wells, or who believe that they might live near contaminated areas, where are there any resources for them to have their personal blood levels tested?
I am not sure I know the answer to that, Senator Pinckney. I think blood testing is done by private labs, Eurofins, private labs who do the work. We don't do it. You need to have special permit to do it. I also don't know how much it costs, but I can find out. I mean, I don't know how you take a sample, sampling of blood and things, but perhaps I can find out if the CDC has some information on their site.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman-Kamala. This was incredibly informative, incredibly helpful. And like I said, gives us a base of some of the things that we need to focus on. I really appreciate where your presentation ends us with the thought of how do we engage diverse stakeholders from the beginning of the planning phase. And that is the intention behind why the Infrastructure and Environment Subcommittee was created, is to make sure that all of the necessary voices, all of the people that are doing the work in boots on the ground, their voices are elevated, and that we as a subcommittee have the ability to go back out to our communities and pull more of those voices to the table so that we are involved from not just the ending and not just the here's what's going to happen, but we're at the table saying this is the issue, how are we going to fix it together? So I think your presentation ends us right where we need to be. And I do really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us and to educate us as a community of caring individuals about what happens specifically in Black and Brown communities who are often left out of these conversations. So thank you again. I look forward to keeping in touch with you. I still owe you a couple of bottles so you guys can test the water here in my home. So I'll be dropping those off soon. And again, one of the things that I think is really important in this space is making sure that we're talking with the boots on the ground organizations who are doing the work and our own state agencies who are doing this work as well. So that is why I'm very excited to move into our next presentation, which is Mr. Patrick Emery from DENRAC. One of our members, Dana Cobb, represents DENRAC as a subcommittee member. And so it is exciting to have DENRAC at the table from beginning to end. And this time, what our kind of next gear shift is going to be what happens when these situations get out of control, when they get cataclysmic. How are we making sure that people are aware that something is happening? How are we notifying residents throughout the state? And so I'm happy to bring in Mr. Patrick Emery, who's going to talk with us a little about that side of things.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Senator Pickney, and good morning to the task force as well. I'm Pat Emery. I'm the Director of the Division of Community Affairs with DENRAC. And with me today, I'm going to have Chief Wood, who is the Chief of the Delaware Natural Resources Police and Environmental Crimes Unit, which is part of the Division of Community Affairs at DENRAC. And we also have the Chief of Staff of DENRAC, Greg Patterson. We appreciate you asking us to be here today to discuss these issues about notifications. And we're going to talk about DERNS. That's what we're going to talk about in particular today. And that's an acronym for Delaware Environmental Release Notification System. Today, we're going to talk about how it works and how you get access to it. I do want to emphasize one thing about DERNS. It's not an emergency notification system. It's not an emergency notification system. It's a system designed to notice environmental releases that are registered to registered users within a 24-hour period from the time the release takes place. We have other tools in our box that can handle emergency notifications, but DERNS is not that tool. Chief Wood works with DERNS on a daily basis, and I'm going to turn it over to him to give you a brief history and how the process works and how the public can access DERNS. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Wood. Again, myself and the deputy, or excuse me, Greg Patterson, I'm going to say Gary Patterson, his father, Greg Patterson, and the chief will be able to answer any questions you have as we follow through this. So go ahead, Chief.
Good morning, Senator Pinckney and the rest of the task force. Thank you for having me. As Director Emery said, I'm going to do an overview of the Delaware Environmental Release Notification System, or again, I don't like acronyms, but it is called the DERNS system. So if there's any questions, as Director Emery said, we will definitely get you some answers and circle back with you on those. The purpose of the DERNS notification system is to document and notify the public of any releases. We have 24 hours to report and document any releases. Again, reiterating what Director Emery said, this is not an emergency notification system. is an environmental release notification system. It was codified in 2001, DERNS under Title VII, 6028. It is a web-based program. You can be notified by email, fax, which I know a lot of people don't have fax machines anymore, but it is stated as such in the regulation, as well as a phone call. All three of these platforms can be notified 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. How is that done? The Delaware Natural Resources Police Environmental Crimes Unit, which I am the chief of, has officers that are on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, officer in each county. These officers are dispatched by our central dispatch center. We also are part of the emergency response team that falls under DENREC and Secretary Garvin. The emergency response team is activated when members of the emergency response branch, which are a very, very strong group of environmental scientists, and our officers, again, the environmental crimes unit, come together to form the emergency response team's response for any incidents in the state that may involve DERNS. The on-call officers receive these information from permitted and non-permitted facilities. When there is a release, they then contact the on-call supervisor. In many cases, is myself. We then review the information that is presented to the department. We then post that information on the DERNS notification system. And depending on which platform you selected when you registered to the system is how you receive the information, whether it's email, fax, or by phone. That being said, you can still receive the information on the web-based platform without being a member. So for individuals that aren't members, which by the way, we currently have 1,803 registered members on our state system. Since 2001 to current date, we have posted over 6,426 notifications to the system. Again, users that register with the system can select any and all zip codes within the state. The reason I bring that up is, for example, I have family in Sussex County. I have friends in Newcastle County. You can enter any zip code that you want. So if you want to know everything that happens in the entire state, you can select the entire zip code selections that are presented to you during registration. If you only want to know what's in your specific area, or Senator Pinckney, as you mentioned earlier, in your district, you can just select your district zip codes. Again, we have 24 hours to post the DERNS. In many cases, it's done prior to 24 hours, but that is what is actually under 6028. We have multiple people within my unit that can post that. So we do have backups for the backup. Obviously, many members that are on here, I do take vacation. So there are other people on my staff that can post this information. And that's pretty much the main functions of it. I'm just looking to see if I missed any main points. It does, the actual posting includes the facility, if it is a permitted facility, the name. If it's not a permitted facility, it includes the 911 location. Obviously, what substance were released and the media in which it was released to, and by media released to, whether that's the ground, the water, the air, etc. There are 10 listed under 6028 requirements that are in the notification system. Again, I mentioned the substance released, but it does give the actual exposure notifications, any and all emergency information that may be needed by the citizens that have registered, and again, or non-registered. This information mirrors exactly what is in the NIOSH book. The names and telephone numbers of the person to contact for further information. So the facilities or the information that was given to us by individuals who have caused the release, because in many cases, they are the subject matter experts that information is also there. So for the general public to get further information, they can get that as well. In some cases, there is information will be put on there of state agencies. It doesn't always require us to list if we don't have a responsible party. If something was to happen, an example of a small gas can falling off the back of a vehicle moving down the road, there would not be a responsible party for that at the time of the incident. So they not always will there be a responsible party until a later criminal investigation is complete, at which time we can update those DERNS notifications post the 24-hour notification. So hopefully that kind of explains a general how we get the information, how DERNS was created, and how it's being implemented today by the Environmental Crimes Unit. And again, as Director Emery said, if you guys have any questions, we'll be glad to circle back with you at a later date.
Senator, this is Greg Patterson. Can I jump in for a sec?
Absolutely.
As Chief Wood said, this is a system that is designed to provide notification, and just to give everybody a sense of exactly how wide. This is not, as he said, an emergency notification system. This is all sorts of substances, hazardous substances, in almost any location. So, for example, if there is a release of flaring from, say, the refinery of a hazardous substance, or a spill there, that will end up triggering a DERNS notification. But so will, for example, a fuel oil spill when the tanks are being refilled at your local Wawa. If there's enough of the oil gets into the parking lot, that triggers a DERNS notification. So it's a very wide universe of things that are covered by DERNS. As Chief Wood said, there have been thousands of reports. You can look at them at any time on our website. They're all listed there. But what you quickly will see is the very wide universe that is represented there. If there's a tanker truck that is involved in a crash on Route 1 and spills gasoline or oil, or that could be a DERNS notification if it's the right amount. So it is a very useful tool, but is very wide-ranging tool. So when you're talking about alerting people to emergencies, DERNS is, as he said, not it. Those are different systems, including the one that is in the control of DEMA, and Director Shaw and Jeff Sands are here from DEMA to talk about that as well. But we certainly view DERNS as a valuable tool, but one that you can probably gets triggered a couple times a week, based on the spills that Chief Wood and our emergency response respond to.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. That was incredibly informative and helpful as well. It's interesting to know that there are so many different ways to kind of alert the public of what's going on. And Mr. Patterson, you actually answered my next question of how frequently do these alerts go off, and both alarming to know that they go off so frequently, but great to know that you guys are catching them as frequently as they're going off.
Chief Wood, what was your number? 6,000 reports?
Yeah, it's 6,426. Most recently, yesterday at, I believe it was around 10 o'clock, we posted one.
And that's over what time period?
That's since 2001 to current.
Right.
Wow.
And as an example, what was the one yesterday that was entered in the system?
Yesterday, I believe off the hip, sir, I don't have information in front of me. I believe it was fuel. I believe it was a fuel spill, which without having that, I didn't print that off in front of me. But a typical fuel spill, if a fuel tank at a home or residence, usually typically stands on 4 iron legs. Over time, the iron will rust, especially with a large amount of rainstorms that we've had. Soil, weight of the fuel, tank will sink into the ground, tip over, disconnects from the heater or fuel system that's functioning the household, and then slowly leaks into the, onto the ground, at which point we get alerted, and then we go out and do an assessment of how many gallons were in the tank versus what we think we have on the ground and remediate the site accordingly. Again, responding with the environmental scientists and emergency response team.
Yep. So there's another example of one of the more common releases that you wouldn't think of as one that triggers an emergency alert, and certainly probably shouldn't, but is captured in the DERN system and reported to the public, or can be looked up by the public. But for the emergency uses, like I said, I think we have Dima here that can speak to that capability.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much. I did neglect to mention them earlier. So what I'll do, we have a couple of members, subcommittee members with questions. I'll go to those questions, and then we will move to Dima, who can talk to us a little bit more about the emergency notification. I think I saw Mr. Scott's hand go up first.
Oh, thank you. Just a question. So would it be safe to assume that for permitted operators who have a release, those things would also result in a notice of violation?
It depends on the level of the release. If it falls within the parameters of the permit, it might not be notified. If it's above the parameters, then it would be.
Okay, so if it were within the parameters of the permit and there was a spill or a release of some other sort to the air, there would be no requirement to report those?
That is my understanding. Chief, can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yes, sir. Mr. Scott, great question. Actually, each permit is dictated when it's written, has the levels in it. I don't know, obviously, all the different levels of different permits throughout the state, but if it reaches the threshold, there is a responsibility by the facility to report when they've exceeded their quantity on their permit, at which time they are responsible to notify us. Typically, again, it's done via dispatch to our officers that are on call. We do also receive email notifications from many of the large facilities within the state as a secondary. As many of the folks on this call know, sometimes cell phones don't work as they're designed. So we do still follow up with the email, as well as to the programs within the department in which govern those particular facilities. And that can be a range of many of the different divisions that my team supports. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Scott.
Great, thank you.
You and Dr. Saunders?
Yes, I'm on DENREC's site now under divisions, and I'm trying to find DERMS and where to register, and I'm not finding it. Is there can the link be posted?
Yeah.
Or?
Yes, Dr. Saunders, this is Chief Wood. If you actually, you can either use a Google search engine or go to the State of Delaware website. And if you go to the State of Delaware website, I don't want to take up the task force time, but if you want me to walk you through it very quickly, you just go to the State of Delaware website, in the search bar, type in DERNS.
Okay, I'll do that.
Once you click on DERNS, the registration will pop up immediately. I think it's a quick 12 red star asterisks that you have to fill out. Again, you can select the zip codes and you will receive notifications however you select, email, fax, or phone.
Thank you.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
can also send links out to all the members. I'll be sending a follow-up email anyway with the slides. From
Oh, outstanding. Thank you.
I believe Dr. Coleman Kamala was next.
Yes, I'm on. So how does this database intersect with the toxic release inventory, TRI database, which, the EPA is going to institute TRI for PFASs, but in general, what is the link between TRIs and this database?
So to my knowledge,
Go ahead.
yeah, to my knowledge, when the system was created, again, I'm not a computer person, but the charts are available that reference the system under 6028. I believe the subsection, I had it here in front of me. the subsection falls under 6028, and it references to extremely hazardous substance, explosives, and non-explosive. And there's two charts there with the actual chemicals that are listed as extremely hazardous. And then once we enter the information that's given to us by, again, either facility or where the incident occurs, we then enter that into the Cameo, the drop-down box in the DERN system. And then it auto-populates from the information that is already into the system. So somehow on the back end of the system, I hope that answers your question, the chemical that we enter auto-populates the two boxes for the notifying what the chemical is and what the IDLHs are to health and human and the environment.
Okay. I'll spend some time searching for TRI, toxic release inventory, is the mechanism by which, EPA now is going to monitor releases of PFAS nationally. And I think all manufacturers that produce or use PFAS above a certain level will now be obligated starting, I don't know, when maybe next year, to report PFAS releases through that TRI mechanism. So I just wanted to know where we would find that for the state of Delaware, but perhaps you can point out, or I can go search for that if there is.
Yeah. Yes, Doctor, and I did look back up real quick in my notes here. It's section 5.130.2, and there's two charts. There's table 1 and 2 are what the DERN system references as extremely hazardous substances when it's released. Again, there are other substances in there that aren't environmentally hazardous, extremely hazardous, but those are the two charts that you can reference to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Lambert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wood, Emery, and Patterson for your service. We very much appreciate you not only providing this information, but for making sure that we remain safe. I wasn't going to ask a question, but when Marlene Saunders, when she asked her question, it kind of made me think, is there an appetite to maybe include a link on DNREC's page where individuals could sign up for, could register to get notifications? I noticed that you said 1,803 Delawareans were registered. I think that not only would it help additional people to get registered, but the idea that people have to go to different pages and do a Google search, I think that it might be smoother for our community to have that education, to have that visibility and transparency, if maybe there's a hyperlink on your main page. Thank you.
Representative Lambert, this is Pat Emery. We'll look into that, see if we can't simplify the process. We'll get back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I've written it down. Thanks, Representative.
Thanks,
I did the Google search and I couldn't find it. I went to state of Delaware DERMS and a lot of stuff came up, and the page that you said would come up. Maybe my phone is inadequate in someone, but it's not difficult to find. Going to state Google and then state of Delaware and then search DERMS, for me anyway.
Well, again, we'll look into that, see if we can't simplify the process and make it much easier for everybody. Sometimes it gets a little complicated. I understand that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. This was excellent and informative, and thank you, subcommittee members, for continuing engagement. While we are on the topic of emergency notifications, I'm going to definitely, I'm excited to bring Dima into the conversation, who will further where we've been talking about notifications. Thank you so much to the members of DNREC for the information that you provided. If you're able, I'm going to ask that you stick around. I know that there is someone in the attendees list who has a hand up that came up when you were all presenting, but we will save that for the public comment section just at the end if you're able to stick around for us. And excited to turn the conversation over to Dima.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. My name is Jeff Sands. Can you see me okay? All right. I'm just going to try to share my presentation here. All right. Can everybody see the screen okay? Okay, thank you. So good morning. My name is Jeff Sands. I'm the Public Information Officer for DEMA. We're the Delaware Emergency Management Agency. So my role is all the coordination and communication with the public, as well as emergency notification. So really happy to have the opportunity to talk to you today about the Delaware Emergency Notification System. So we're going to talk first about IPAWS, and I'll go into a little more detail about what exactly that is. It's the national system, and then I'll kind of dive down to the local level to what we use in Delaware. We're going to discuss wireless emergency alerts, some of the types of events that might trigger an alert. I'm going to use the Crota incident from 2018 as a case study of how some things could have gone better, and then talk about how things would go today if the same situation were to occur. So this is a really complex topic. I apologize. You know, if your eyes roll up in the back of your head, I completely understand. I'll do my best to simplify things. But IPAWS is the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. And so this is a national system that's maintained by FEMA. The whole purpose is to be able to, for the president to be able to address the nation during a time of emergency. That's why it was created. But it's really expanded from that to have a lot more meaning and a lot of different roles. So this is a pretty complex chart, but basically through the IPAWS system, we have the ability to send out emergency alert system activations. You'd probably be familiar with that through your radio and television. You hear weekly tests. You know, this is a test of the emergency alert system. Wireless emergency alerts, which go to your cell phone. An example of that would be Amber Alerts. Noaa weather radio. So if you're familiar with these weather radios, they're similar to an alarm clock that are activated when there's a severe weather event in your area, and then a variety of other services, internet services, and different kinds of technologies, websites, social media, etc. So it's a whole suite of different products that can be utilized to try to alert the public during different kinds of emergencies. So these are just a few examples. There's really a variety of situations where this system could be used. Currently, there's a lot of wildfires going on out west, many of which are requiring evacuations. And so that's just one example of where some of these products or all of these products may be used. And then just a whole variety of other possible situations, including chemical spills, nuclear emergencies, and snowstorms, for a few more examples. So these are just a few examples of last year. I'm going to show a chart in a moment that shows kind of how much the IPAWS system has grown and how much it's being used these days. But some examples are during COVID-19, there were permissions added so that you could send out emergency alerts for different kinds of requirements. So say, if the state issued a stay-at-home order, that was something that wireless emergency alerts, the EAS system, could be used to send that out. And these are just a few statistics talking about how they were utilized during COVID-19, as well as some of the civil unrest last year. There were a variety of wireless emergency alerts and other types of notifications that were sent out. So this platform has really expanded considerably in the last few years. And this is a good chart kind of showing how much it's grown from when it was introduced. Pretty dramatic increases in the numbers. And what I think is interesting to note is that more and more agencies are using this system. So there's an application process, there's testing requirements. We'll go into that a little bit later, but they're growing pretty dramatically, the number of local agencies that have the ability to send alerts using this system. And as you can see, 2020, a massive year for alerts. Over 2,800 alerts were sent out through wireless emergency alerts in particular. So significant growth over the last few years in this technology. So one of the challenges is that it's not easy, and not everybody has access to send alerts through this system. So, there's about 6 other states that only have state level agencies that can send alerts using IPAWS. You can see a couple of those examples: the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Vermont, Rhode Island. So there's other states that only a state level agency such as us would send out alerts for the entire state. but gradually it's been expanding to more and more local agencies, which I think is great. So IPAWS, we talked about it, it's the national system. Let's kind of talk about how it affects Delaware and how we use this system locally. So our agency is the State Alerting Authority. So we completed our MOU and our training in 2016 to be able to have the ability to use this IPAWS system and to send wireless emergency alerts and other different types of alerts. The only other agency in the state that's currently authorized to send IPAWS alerts is Newcastle County Office of Emergency Management. So they finished their certification process in 2019, but just recently completed the final steps to be able to send alerts. So basically that puts the responsibility on us to be able to send out alerts. And we're going to talk more about some of the different opportunities for how we send alerts out to people and under what circumstances, but just providing that kind of high level overview. So currently 911 centers in Delaware, the Delaware State Police, county emergency management agencies, and some local agencies have access to the Delaware emergency notification system. So we'll discuss that a little bit. That's basically our name for IPAWS in Delaware. So we talked about IPAWS, it's that national system. There's a variety of different methods that you can use to send alerts out. And so we've rebranded it locally as the Delaware Emergency Notification System. And our current vendor is a company called Swift 911. And our backup system is currently a company called Rave that actually purchased and bought out Swift 911. So this system allows authorized local, county, and state agencies to be able to send emergency alerts in a variety of different situations. We can send text messages, voice calls, what you might be familiar with the reverse 911 concept, emails, social media posts. We can use that emergency alert system over radio and television, and we can send wireless emergency alerts to your cell phone. So a variety of different tools that can be utilized depending on what the situation may be. So by the numbers, and one of the challenges that we have is that people have to opt into this system. So in order to receive notifications, and there's an asterisk there because there's always a what if, but register through our website, or they have to create a Smart 911 profile. If you're not familiar with Smart 911, it's a great system. You basically can go to the website, smart911.com. You can fill as much or as little information about your home as you wish. And so in the age where there's fewer and fewer landline phones and more people rely on their cell phones, if you call 911 from a cell phone, there's ways that they can kind of figure out where you are if you need help. But one of the benefits of Smart 911 is you can create a profile which will automatically pop up on the dispatcher's screen so that they can provide faster assistance with more information. So if you have somebody at home that's maybe mobility challenged, that can't get out of the house and there's a fire, that's important information that the 911 dispatcher can relay to the crews because you entered it into your Smart 911 profile. And there's a variety of other things that are benefits for this system as well. So two options: register through our website or create a Smart 911 profile, and we get a data dump from Smart 911 on a quarterly basis. So by the numbers, and this is one of the challenges we have, only 12,100 or a little more than that people have opted into this DEN system in Delaware. One of the other notes that I want to make is that we do have over 671,000 E911 contacts also uploaded. So from Smart 911, landline numbers, a variety of other things. So we do have quite a large number of phone numbers that we can tap into in the system. But we do prefer that people sign up, and it's been a relatively small number of people that have opted in. During COVID-19, we worked with the governor's office to be able to provide text updates to anybody that was interested about changes with rules and regulations, opportunities for testing, vaccinations, et cetera. And over 20,000 people did elect to opt in to that COVID-19 update, which is great. So there's definitely some appetite for updates. Part of the challenge just is getting people to enter their information, and a step further than that is getting to update the information. So wireless emergency alerts, it's the craze these days. I think it's a great system. You're probably getting more and more of them to your phone for severe weather events. Why are they so great? And I think the important thing to note is that a majority of people in the United States are using cell phones these days. So these other systems that previously existed, the emergency alert system, any other system that was in place, they're kind of broad strokes. And we have the ability with wireless emergency alerts to send a very specific message instantaneously to a lot of people. And they don't have to sign up. That's one of the benefits of it. So they're geographically targeted, they're highly accurate, they're based on cell towers. So no, we're not tracking the public, people don't have to worry about that. It's based on the cell tower that your phone's pinging off of. So if we draw a circle around a certain area that we need to send an emergency notification, if anybody's in that area, they should receive the message. Now there's some caveats. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But one of the benefits is, like I said before, that no subscription is required to use a wireless emergency alert. We're going to hit people if they're visitors to the state who haven't signed up for DENS, people who work in Delaware but maybe live in another state. Another benefit is that now we can transmit in both English and Spanish, so people can select which language they prefer to receive the message in. And so that enables us to be able to reach an even wider variety and get the important messages out that they need. And then there's expanded authority for more types of incidents. I showed some references to 2020 and some of the COVID-19 alerts that were able to be sent out, some for civil unrest, other types of emergencies. And so they have been gradually expanding the different types of emergencies that we're allowed to send wireless emergency alerts out for. Now, some of the drawbacks, and this is true with each of these emergency systems, is that carrier participation is voluntary. So cell phone companies do not have to participate, or they can choose their level of participation. So that's one challenge. A second challenge is that not all phones can receive wireless emergency alerts. Older phones, most of them are kind of phasing out over time. Some of them still have challenges getting them. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the character lengths in a minute here, but older phones, if they do receive them, may only be able to receive a shorter version. So that's a real challenge for me as a communicator to try to provide a succinct and short 90-character emergency message to somebody versus the 360-character messages that we can send to smartphones. And then another thing is not all phones receive the message all the time. So last week we had a national test of the iPause system. And part of that was if you had signed up to receive test messages, you would have received a wireless emergency alert to your phone. One of my cell phones, my personal cell phone, I had on the table in front of me that's through AT&T FirstNet. I received the test on that phone. My work phone, which is a Verizon cell phone that was sitting right next to it, I did not receive the test. So the technology is improving. It's constantly getting better, but you're not guaranteed to receive the message all the time, which is one of the challenges. Greater distances between cell phone towers also can lower the accuracy. So in parts of rural Kent County and Sussex County, that kind of circle that we could draw to make a highly accurate wireless emergency alert go out may not be quite as accurate. Now, I'd rather reach more people than not enough, but it's just something to think about. And if the cell phone towers go down, the message isn't going to go out. So some of the feedback that we got during Tropical Storm Isaiah was that some tornado warnings were sent out by the National Weather Service, and some people didn't get them because they didn't have cell service at the time, whether that was a tower failure or what it was, but you're not going to get that message. So that is one of the challenges with the system as well. And just to kind of highlight, at the bottom, that little chart just shows from 2012, when they initially created wireless emergency alerts, it's expanded quite a bit. And now today we have the ability to send messages with 1/10 of a mile accuracy, 360 characters in English and Spanish, which is fantastic. And I know that it's going to continue to expand. All right, so why aren't more agencies using it in Delaware? I kind of talked that I spoke about how we are the state agency that's responsible for, we're the state alerting agency, and that Newcastle County Office of Emergency Management also has the ability to send iPause messages. So it's a lengthy certification process. It does require quite a bit of additional training. There's monthly tests that you have to complete. Staffing concerns. So, we're a relatively small agency. I think we're up to 47 staff. The county level emergency management agencies may be 1 or 2 people, it may be 3 or 4 people. So staffing is definitely a challenge. And then there's been quite a few newsworthy issues. So many of you may be familiar or have seen in the headlines that in 2018, somebody accidentally sent out a test message in Hawaii saying that there was a ballistic missile threat inbound, but it didn't say test, and it went out to the entire state. And so significant panic, major issue. There was obviously quite a bit of scrutiny and an investigation that went into it, but identified some issues. So part of the problem is it's a live system. So if you get a disgruntled staff member, if you get somebody that has made a mistake, maybe didn't put that it was a training message, there's the potential to cause quite a bit of chaos. And then a more recent example from April of this year in LA County, California, there's a gas leak in a small town that's just outside the city of Los Angeles. They try to send a wireless emergency alert for about a 300-foot area. So a very small area to tell people to shelter in place until the gas leak has been secured. And they accidentally sent it out to all of LA County. So another challenge, the technology continues to improve. I'm not sure if that was operator error, likely it was. But there's quite a bit of training and responsibility that goes into sending these wireless emergency alerts. So the way I want to kind of paint this whole system for you is, it goes from broad strokes to very surgical precision. So the emergency alert system, which I mentioned previously, that goes across radio as well as television stations that opt in, can only be localized as far as the county level. So if there's an emergency that's across the state of Delaware, an EAS message could be activated for, say, example, a hurricane. And so it's going to travel throughout the state. People are going to be notified about what they're supposed to do. It works very well if people are monitoring radio or television stations that have opted in. Again, the challenge, though, just like with the cell phone alerts, we don't regulate radio stations in the state of Delaware. That's something the FCC does. And it's considered optional for stations to carry emergency alert system messages. So Comcast, Verizon, Fios, they don't carry the messages. They're required to transmit presidential level national emergency messages, but many of them choose not to send the weather alerts, some of the other local emergencies, because they don't have to. And part of the problem is that we really can't regulate that. So Noaa Weather Radio, I mentioned it previously. It's something that's maintained by the National Oceanographic Administration. And so the National Weather Service can activate that as well as the emergency alert system and send wireless emergency alerts during a severe weather emergency, such as a tornado warning, severe thunderstorm warning, a hurricane, things along those lines. So weather radio is great, but again, it can only be localized as far as a county level. So it's a broad stroke. If there's a wide scale incident, those are 2 good tools to use. Wireless emergency alerts, we talked about, it can get very accurate down to about 1/10 of a mile, which is great. And sometimes even inside of that. So this is something that we have the ability to send a very targeted message to a wide variety of people in a very timely fashion, which is fantastic. The other products that I talked about from our state system, such as text messages, voicemail or reverse 911, email, they can be geofenced, so we can draw a circle around an area, but it's only as good as the data we have. So if people aren't subscribing to the system, or if they haven't updated their information in the system, they're either going to get an alert when they don't live there anymore, or they're not going to get an alert. And that's one of the challenges that we saw with CROTA. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So this is just an example of what the screen looks like if I have to send a wireless emergency alert. And the reason that I'm telling you this is because I want you to kind of understand some of the challenges associated with this. So we have to select a variety of different tools. I know it's a little small, but you can select what kind of methods you want to send it with. So in this case, I selected the emergency alert system, wireless emergency alerts, and then I wanted to send it out through the public IPAWS channel as well. You pick a message name, you select a category. Is it a hazmat? Is it a weather emergency? And then you have to kind of go through a list of how severe of an emergency is it? What do you want people to do? And then the first thing that I have to do is I have to enter a 90-character message. So if you look at that message where it says CMAM contact 90-character max, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but right here, hazmat, shelter in place has been ordered, go indoors, instructions at news.delaware.gov. That's 89 characters. That's not a lot of information. And so older cell phones, that's maybe all they're going to receive. The next line shows what a 360-character message would look like. You can provide a lot more detail. You can say, hey, there's a shelter in place order due to a hazardous leak. Go inside immediately, close your windows and doors, turn off your air conditioning, stay inside until you're told otherwise. And then you can provide links for people to go get more information. So much better system. The Spanish that I mentioned earlier, we now have the ability to send messages in the Spanish language as well, which is great. It's a challenge for me though. I'm not fluent in Spanish. I have some familiarity, but you can't use any of the special characters when we're sending these. So I have to go into a translation system or use one of our Spanish speaking colleagues to write the message out. Generally, Spanish tends to be longer than English. So if you're trying to send a 90-character message, it's a nightmare. And this is something that we're trying to do very quickly in a short period of time. So it's a challenge. And then I have to go in and manually remove all of the little special characters and accents. And so definitely a challenge, but this is what it looks like. Then I can go in and I can select on a map the area that I want to alert, whether it's the entire state, whether it's a county, or I can draw a very specific circle around an area. And one of the examples that we recently used a wireless emergency alert similar to this was for a hazardous materials incident on I-95. So a couple examples of when we've used wireless emergency alerts in Delaware. I believe I was the first one in the state to send wireless emergency alert, which is fantastic. And it's a tool that we've been using quite a bit of late. So in October, there were some 911 outages, you may recall. I think there were 3 different occasions where some various amounts of 911 cell phone outages occurred. And so this is one example of a wireless emergency alert that we transmitted to the state, specifically Kent and Sussex counties, telling them that there were issues and that they could go to the link news.delaware.gov to get the alternate numbers for 911. And then we also encourage them not to test call 911 because that could just tie up the lines if they were working. Second example on the right-hand side, this is the map we drew for the I-95 incident a few months ago. And so there was a crash on I-95. The fire department responded. They rescued a few occupants that were trapped in the vehicle, transported them to the hospital, and then realized pretty quickly that they had a hazardous materials incident involved as well. So the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control came out. They provided some assistance. Hazardous materials response units from the fire department was there as well. And Newcastle County Office of Emergency Management responded. Ultimately, they decided that the best way to mitigate the situation and make it safe for everybody was to burn off the chemical. And so they wanted to make sure that we did a half-mile shelter-in-place order for the area around there. Fortunately, primarily commercial, not a lot of houses in the area, but I was able to draw on a map exactly a half-mile radius around the scene. We were able to send out a wireless emergency alert as well as the DENS messages, so a text and reverse 911 call to people in the area that were within that zone to tell them to shelter in place until they were told that it was all safe. So just a few examples in recent history of how we've used wireless emergency alerts and other DENS alerts in the state. So what are the types of events that might trigger a notification? This is where, once again, it's a little complicated. So there's a lot of different players. Severe weather alerts come from the National Weather Service. So we don't initiate severe weather alerts. And it's something that's great because I don't have to wake up in the middle of the night and send a tornado warning out. But we also don't have a lot of say in that. So it's a really good system. They'll send wireless emergency alerts. They'll send the emergency alert system and a few other things, but definitely a good system that's fairly well automated. Amber alerts are another system that's pretty well defined. There's rules about how they handle them, and they get sent out by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's the national organization that's responsible for Amber alerts. We also have the ability to send them out, but primarily the police or the state police go through that agency. So for a shelter in place, we see these sometimes by law enforcement if they're doing an investigation for a barricaded subject, something like that. That might prompt a DENS notification, and the 911 centers all have the ability to send every piece of that except for a wireless emergency alert. Hazmat incidents or fire incidents are other examples of situations where these alerts might be sent out. But one of the things that I want to stress in Delaware is that the fire officer on scene is in charge of the scene and works closely with DENREC, that's the branch operations for hazmat. And so those kind of two agencies, the fire and DENREC, are working very closely together until it hits a pretty high level response that would bring our agency to play. So it really is at the discretion of the fire officer on scene if they're going to send something out or not. And then just a variety of other emergencies. So why bother with DENS? There's no one size fits all solution. So we can't just put all of our eggs in one basket and send a wireless emergency alert. Our kind of mentality is that we're going to use every platform available to notify people. And so that's exactly what we try to do. And wireless emergency alerts aren't authorized or necessarily needed in every situation. So CROTA, just really quick, I'm going to touch on this. So the fire department was in charge of that response in 2018. They worked closely with DENREC that managed the hazmat side of things and Newcastle County Emergency Management. They did issue a reverse 911 for a shelter in place order, but as these charts will allude to, only 1% of the calls that were placed, so 22 out of the 1,961 calls using the DENS system were actually received. So that's a pretty significant failure on the part of notifications. And one of the things that I want to stress is that if it happened again today, I think it would be a pretty different outcome. And the reason I say that is because we have a better system in place. Newcastle County and the state have the ability to send wireless emergency alerts, and we have done so very recently. There's more resources that could have been brought to bear. And really the whole suite of tools, including iPaws, DENS, everything would have been used to try to reach the public and alert them. And in addition, the sirens were installed by CROTA to be able to alert the local population. And so I'll use that I-95 hazmat again as an example of kind of the improvements. We sent that wireless emergency alert, we sent text, reverse 911, we used the whole suite of products to notify people to shelter in place. So just as a kind of a recap, DENS provides us with a variety of methods to reach the public. Wireless emergency alerts are fantastic. I mean, they're awesome. I can't stress it enough, but they're not perfect. They're continuing to improve, and it's just another tool in our toolbox. And we have and will continue to keep using them along with every other method we can to try to reach the public during an emergency. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much. This was, you really packed a lot of information in really quickly, so thank you for that. And it's amazing to know how much we've advanced in the technology that we have access to over the years. I grew up in the area that was impacted by the CROTA leak, and my mom still lives there. And I remember talking to her like, did you know about this? Did you know that this happened? And she had no idea that it happened. So it's really refreshing to know that if for some crazy reason something were to happen again, that the public would be notified. And we have improved ways of doing that and accessing them. In the event of time, what I would like to do is open us up to public comment. There's only one person in the public, so I'm going to go to that question first so we can make sure that we get to public comment. And then depending on what our time looks like, since I don't want to steal anybody's extra minutes, I will come back to subcommittee members who do have their hands up as well. And I just want to note for subcommittee members, we'll make sure that you have contact information for everyone who did present today as well. But in the meantime, Caitlin, I'm going to turn it over to you for the public comment question.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Donald Farrell, I am unmuting you. You should be allowed to ask your question now.
It isn't a question. It's basically a statement. The EPA has a lead service line replacement grant available, and I wanted to know if the state could apply for it and assist the city of Wilmington. Wilmington's housing stock is old, and many properties have lead service lines. We have addressed lead paint in a meaningful way, but we're falling short on water. Now, even though the city of Wilmington has a wastewater treatment plant and adds neutralizing agents to coat the supply lines to minimize lead exposure, this isn't enough. After listening to the PFAS presentation, I do know that there are a lot of inputs that come from Newcastle County that are industrial inputs that may have PFAS in them. And if the PFAS isn't eliminated through the wastewater treatment plant, are we in the city of Wilmington being exposed to these? Now, the replacement costs are prohibitive for most folks. It costs about $10,000 to replace a lead service line. Because of the residential development happening in Wilmington, we'd like to see all homes being rehabbed, and any new construction should have the lead service lines replaced if it isn't being done already. And again, my question is, could the state apply for this grant and assist the city of Wilmington in applying for the funds to address these issues? Lastly, this grant could also develop a robust water line flushing program for schools, daycares, and other facilities. In closing, I found that we're focusing on lead, but are we also being exposed to PFAS? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. I appreciate that question. And I did make a note of your question about the ability for the state to apply for that grant. And it's definitely something that I will look into. I'm sure my colleagues will also look into. I want to give a shout out to Representative Lambert, who did introduce a bill around lead testing for young children this year. And so lead is definitely something that is on the minds of members of the legislature and certainly this body as well. So thank you very much for that question. And again, we'll look further into it. We have about 5 minutes left. So Representative Lambert, I'm going to actually yield to Mr. Scott first. Mr. Scott, if you want to give us 30 seconds for your question, and then I will get you a 30-second answer, and then we'll try to get Rep. Lambert's question in. And I think we can do this in our 4 minutes left.
I can do it in less than 30 seconds. It's not a question and it doesn't need an answer. Just a comment that as we've learned from the Crota example, and I think as was pointed out in the presentation, the technology that's evolving around, the reverse 911 and the wireless notifications, that'll continue to evolve and it'll get better. But I think as we learn with Crota, we need to be conscious of the fact that from a social standpoint and perhaps a demographic standpoint, there are limitations, beyond just the technology itself. And so access to, these various media, as well as the ability to utilize the media, and some of that may be age dependent, and I'll, as an old person, say that, okay, because it's difficult for me to funnel through some of the stuff, and it can be complex. So the only point is, let's not forget some of the more draconian means of ensuring that people are aware of an emergency in their environment. And I think the sirens, that were installed for Crota are an example of what that looks like, so that when the cell tower doesn't work or people aren't in the house or the phone's on charge or whatever, at least they get that notification that something's going bad and I need to take action. And, there are fewer dependencies on technology and capability to get that communication out. So let's just not lose sight of that as we go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. And what I will do, I see Mr. Shaw from DEMA has raised his hand, and I'm assuming to reply. Mr. Shaw, we will end with you. I do apologize to CETA and Rep. Lambert. I just want to make sure that we are ending on time.
Sure.
15 seconds and I'll yield it back to you. But in one of our plans specific for the radiological emergency preparedness plan for the Salem Hope Creek plant, we actually still have a tool in our toolbox, which I think is what we're talking about, which is route alerting, which is if need be in communities, we will send people around with loudspeakers, et cetera, to notify people. So we hear you, Mr. Scott, and agree with you 100%.
Thank you so much. It doesn't even feel like we only did this in 2 hours. There was so much information jam-packed into this time and just so much for us as a subcommittee to go back and digest. Like I said, we have been so heavily focused on the infrastructure side, and I'm excited to move to the environmental side. And thank you to PFAS Solutions, to DNREC and to DEMA for showing us what we have out there already in existence and for showing us what we need to work on. And I'm excited to charge and task the members of this body to figure out what recommendations we would like to make to the fuller body as we move forward. We're thinking about what we already have and what we need to work on to make sure that Black and Brown communities are protected in this. I'm proud to be a member of the legislature where we did talk about some of this stuff this session, which was my first session, and Rep. Lambert introduced amazing legislation in this area, but we clearly see that there's so much more to do. It wouldn't be me if I didn't leave one last task to, I think it was DEMA. I'm so excited to see that you guys have done the work to include Spanish speaking language. I would also charge to consider including French Creole, which is our third most populous language in the state. So if we could consider moving forward to include French Creole as a language of inclusion as well, I think that would be fantastic. Again, thank you to all the members of this body for your time, for the work that you do. I believe that you all have been sent a schedule moving forward of the days that we'll be meeting so we could have some regularity with our meetings moving forward. Senator Lockman will be back with us after she's done enjoying her much deserved honeymoon that she put off. We will, when we come back in September, we'll discuss the full body meeting that occurred. And with that, I'm excited because it's 12 on the dot and I ended it. I'm not stealing any extra minutes. Everybody have a beautiful Tuesday, and we will send you out all of the information that was sent to us by our presenters today.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.